Nadia, the glamorous wife of a Dubai millionaire, and Karim, her cousin's husband, seemed to live lives wrapped in wealth and respectability. But their secret affair would spiral into a chain of betrayal, disease, and revenge so dark it would shatter two families and leave behind one of the most shocking scandals in Dubai's elite circles. Nadia's life looked flawless to anyone who caught even a glimpse of it. She lived in a mansion in Dubai, a vast estate filled with marble floors that reflected light like water, chandeliers that dripped with crystals, and balconies overlooking the desert skyline. She was the wife of a millionaire who had built his empire from real estate and international trade. To the world, she was the woman who had everything: wealth, beauty, and influence. But inside the walls of that mansion, she often found herself staring into emptiness. Her husband was rarely home, always away on business trips or buried in meetings that stretched late into the night. Days bled into nights with little human warmth, only silence broken by the hum of the air conditioning and the sound of her heels echoing through hallways that seemed too wide for one person. The staff in the house attended to her every need, but their presence never filled the hollow space in her heart. She had closets filled with luxury handbags, endless jewelry boxes, and designer gowns that still carried their price tags. Shopping distracted her for a moment, spa treatments relaxed her body, but at the end of each day she felt the weight of loneliness pressing down. She envied couples she saw strolling along the Dubai marina, laughing together, sharing ice cream cones, or simply sitting side by side. She had all the material luxuries one could dream of, yet not the thing she craved most: affection. Her cousin often invited her to family gatherings, hoping to lift her spirits. Those evenings were filled with loud conversations, traditional dishes, and bursts of laughter that felt so different from the coldness of her own home. It was in those gatherings that she noticed Karim, her cousin's husband. He was tall, charming, and carried himself with confidence. He was nothing like her own husband, who was always glued to his phone or talking in monotone about investments and profits. Karim had a different energy, warm, attentive, and playful. He spoke with ease, and when he laughed, his eyes seemed to draw people in. At first, Nadia's attention toward him was just curiosity. She found herself stealing glances, noticing the way he carried conversations or helped with small tasks without being asked. Soon, those glances turned into lingering looks, and she realized he was watching her too. There was a spark, subtle but undeniable, and though neither of them said anything, the air between them grew heavier with every meeting. The danger of it all only fueled her thoughts. She was a married woman, bound not only by her vows but also by the weight of her husband's name. Any scandal in their circle would spread like wildfire. But temptation has a way of ignoring reason. One afternoon, during a family barbecue, she found herself alone with Karim in the garden for only a few minutes. He asked her a simple question about her life in the mansion, and she felt herself opening up in ways she had never dared with anyone else. That moment was brief, but it lit a flame she could not extinguish. From then on, she began seeking him out. A smile exchanged across a room, a brush of hands when passing a plate, a fleeting moment on the staircase when their eyes locked and said everything words could not. It was reckless, but the thrill made her heart race. Her loneliness began to transform into obsession. It wasn't long before the stolen moments moved beyond family events. She orchestrated excuses to see him, finding ways to escape the watchful eyes of others. Their first secret meeting was in a cafe tucked away in a quieter part of the city. Nadia wore sunglasses and a scarf, hoping no one would recognize her, but she barely cared about being discovered. The adrenaline of finally sitting across from him alone drowned out her fear. They talked for hours about her unhappy marriage, about his frustrations, about things they could never voice to anyone else. That meeting was the beginning of something they could not turn back from. The secrecy of their affair became as intoxicating as the attraction itself. They met in private villas rented under false names, luxury hotels where they could hide in the anonymity of wealth, and even in cars parked in discreet corners of underground garages. Nadia showered him with expensive gift swatches, designer clothes, even small amounts of cash slipped into his hand with a smile. For her, it wasn't about the money, but about keeping him close, binding him to her world. For him, It was a dangerous combination of passion and greed. Every encounter grew riskier. She would sneak out of her mansion with fabricated excuses, claiming she was meeting friends or attending charity events. Karim grew bolder, pushing for more, enjoying the lavish attention she provided. Nadia convinced herself this was love, something she had been deprived of for years. She ignored the risks, convinced that their secret could remain hidden forever. But shadows were beginning to follow them. A hotel staff member noticed their frequent visits, a neighbor spotted her car in unusual places, and even her own cousin had started to question Karim's late nights and sudden absences. What Nadia believed was invisible was already being pieced together in whispers. Her world, so carefully constructed, had started to fracture. Still, she continued, blind to the storm forming around her. In her mind, she had finally tasted freedom and affection. She saw Karim not only as a lover, but as the escape from the prison of her empty mansion. What she could not see was how fragile her illusion really was. The fire she had lit was spreading in silence, and soon it would consume everything she had: her marriage, her reputation, and her health in ways she could never have imagined. The affair that began as a secret thrill was no longer just a betrayal of her vows. It was the first step down a path that would leave lives shattered, families broken, and her name forever entangled in a scandal too dark to escape. And as she drifted deeper into Karim's world, she had no idea that someone was already watching closely, waiting for the perfect moment to expose it all. The affair grew more dangerous with each passing week, and Nadia no longer cared about the risks. The thrill of sneaking away from her mansion, of hearing Karim's voice, of feeling his presence, had become an addiction that swallowed every thought she had. At first, their secret was contained to private corners of the city, but as passion clouded judgment, their recklessness started leaving behind traces. What Nadia saw as harmless moments of pleasure began to form a dangerous web that others were starting to notice. Her cousin was the first to sense that something was wrong. Karim had become distant at home, often coming back late at night with vague explanations. He had excuses ready, but they never seemed convincing. His phone was guarded like a treasure chest, and his eyes sometimes carried a guilty look when his wife pressed him for answers. She tried to dismiss her instincts, believing marriage simply had its ups and downs, but the unease kept growing. Meanwhile, Nadia began inventing new lies to cover her disappearances. She told her husband she had joined charity groups, signed up for private art classes, and even claimed she was spending weekends with her mother. To him, these excuses sounded like ways to fill her boredom, and he barely gave them thought. But the more lies she created, the easier it became for them to unravel. Rumors began to ripple quietly through their wealthy family circle. The wealthy elite in Dubai thrived on gossip, and the smallest spark could ignite a firestorm of speculation. A hotel staff member whispered about seeing the millionaire's wife in a private suite with a man who wasn't her husband. A distant relative claimed to have spotted her car parked near a villa known for discreet affairs. None of these rumors reached Nadia directly, but they floated like smoke, and smoke always hinted at fire. Her husband at first refused to believe such whispers. His pride was too strong, and the thought that his wife could betray him felt impossible. To outsiders, he displayed confidence and composure, assuring himself that she was loyal, that nothing could tarnish the image he had built. But the small cracks in her story began to bother him. One evening, he called home from abroad, only to find her unavailable at hours she should have been inside the mansion. Another time, a driver mentioned seeing her in a part of the city where she had no reason to be. Slowly, his denial shifted into suspicion. Meanwhile, Karim was intoxicated by his new life. Nadia had opened a world of luxury for him that he had never experienced before. Watches worth thousands of dollars sat on his wrist, and his wardrobe filled with designer labels that his modest salary could never have afforded. He basked in the excitement of the affair and the expensive gifts, but with every reward came a risk. He underestimated how quickly secrets travel in tightly knit families. His wife's intuition sharpened, and she began checking his phone, questioning his movements, pressing harder when his explanations faltered. Karim dismissed her concerns, but inside he felt the walls closing in. The danger only added fuel to Nadia's obsession. The secrecy, the possibility of being caught, The knowledge that she was defying not only her husband but also her entire family made every meeting with Kareem burn brighter. She convinced herself it was worth it, that this was the love she deserved. What she did not realize was that every choice she made was weaving a noose around her neck. It was a careless mistake that began to expose them. One evening, Nadia sent Kareem a message arranging a meeting. She believed she had deleted it immediately after, but her husband, already suspicious, happened to glance at her phone when it vibrated on the table. A fragment of the conversation remained, just enough to confirm his fears. The anger that surged through him was overwhelming, but instead of confronting her outright, he chose to wait to gather more evidence. He was a man who thrived on control, and now he would use that same discipline to uncover the truth. Kareem and Nadia continued, unaware of the tightening net around them. At a luxury hotel, a guest spotted them in the lobby and discreetly took a photograph. That image soon made its way through whispers and hidden messages to Nadia's cousin. The sight of her husband standing next to Nadia, in a place they should never have been, sent shockwaves of betrayal through her. The puzzle she had been piecing together suddenly had its missing piece. Her cousin's heartbreak quickly turned into fury, but she hesitated to confront them directly. She knew the consequences of such a scandal would extend far beyond her marriage. Family honor, reputation, and social standing would all collapse if this secret spilled into the public. Still, the weight of silence was unbearable. She began confiding in one trusted relative, and soon the whispers turned into storms. The once private affair was now a dangerous secret balancing on the edge of exposure. Nadia, blind to the growing danger, carried on as though the world had not changed around her. She believed she was clever enough to keep the truth buried, but her husband was now watching her closely. Every movement tracked, every excuse tested. Kareem, sensing the pressure from his wife's suspicions, began to distance himself slightly, but not enough to break free. He was still tied to Nadia, both by desire and by the gifts that made him feel powerful. The glamorous life Nadia had worked so hard to preserve began to crumble without her realizing it. The affair, once her thrilling escape from loneliness, had turned into a dangerous obsession that dragged everyone into its path. Her cousin's marriage was hanging by a thread, her own husband was plotting quietly, and her family's name was being whispered in corners of Dubai's elite gatherings. The fire that had started with a single stolen glance was now spreading uncontrollably. What Nadia thought was love was quickly becoming her undoing. And as the walls closed in, she failed to see that the biggest danger was not just being caught, it was the hidden secret Kareem had carried all along. A truth that would soon transform their scandal into something far darker and irreversible. When the affair finally came into the open, the fallout was immediate and devastating. There was no longer room for whispers or speculation. Photographs had circulated. Text messages had been uncovered, and Nadia's husband no longer doubted what had been happening behind his back. The confrontation did not come with screaming or public humiliation. Instead, he chose silence, a kind of cold, calculated response that cut deeper than any outburst could. He did not throw her out of the mansion, nor did he file for divorce immediately. Instead, he decided to let her live with the weight of her mistake. He wanted her to feel the slow suffocation of disgrace, a punishment that would gnaw at her far longer than anger ever could. Nadia expected an explosion of rage, but what she faced was worse: indifference. Her husband carried on with his business, treating her as though she were invisible, a ghost haunting the house she once ruled over. For someone who had lived on admiration, attention, and material indulgence, this absence of acknowledgement was unbearable. Every gesture, every look that was withheld reminded her that she had lost control of the life she thought was secure. Meanwhile, Kareem, the man she had risked everything for, began to retreat. With the affair no longer a hidden thrill, the danger of exposure suffocated him. His wife had confronted him with the evidence, and his life at home was collapsing. His career opportunities were drying up as whispers reached his workplace. The gifts and the affection Nadia once provided no longer outweighed the crushing reality of disgrace. He began ignoring her calls, finding excuses to avoid her, and slowly cutting her out of his life. The man who once clung to her attention and luxuries was abandoning her when she needed him most. Nadia could not accept this. She had sacrificed her reputation and risked her place in the elite circles of Dubai for him. She convinced herself that what they shared had been real, that Karim's distance was only temporary, and that he would eventually come back to her. Her obsession deepened even as the walls closed in around her. What Nadia did not know was that Karim had been hiding something far more dangerous than betrayal. Years before their affair began, he had been living a secret that few knew about. A late-night encounter in another country had left him infected with HIV, and instead of confronting the truth or seeking treatment, he chose denial. He never told his wife, never told his doctors, and certainly never told Nadia. He managed to conceal it, convincing himself that as long as he appeared healthy, the truth could remain buried. The shame and fear of exposure kept him silent, even as he continued to build relationships that put others at risk. For Karim, the affair with Nadia was never supposed to last long. It was meant to be a brief escape, a reckless indulgence fueled by her wealth and affection. He never imagined it would spiral into something so consuming. When the scandal broke, he feared not just the disgrace of being caught, but also the possibility that his darkest secret would come to light. If anyone discovered his condition, it would destroy him entirely. The whispers about the affair already carried enough venom. The truth about his health would turn scandal into a weapon that could ruin him forever. As weeks passed, Nadia began to feel changes in her body. At first, she dismissed them as stress, the physical toll of shame and betrayal. She felt tired, suffered from night sweats, and began losing weight despite eating normally. Her skin lost its glow, and she could no longer hide the exhaustion in her eyes. When she finally visited a doctor, the results shattered her world. The tests confirmed that she was HIV positive. The words felt like a death sentence, stripping away the last fragments of dignity she had left. The revelation consumed her. She sat in silence in her mansion, staring at her reflection, wondering how her life had crumbled so quickly. The glamorous woman who once walked through malls and salons with pride was now drowning in fear and shame. She knew instantly where it had come from, and the realization filled her with rage. Karim had not only betrayed her but also condemned her. He had stolen her future, her health, and her place in the world she once ruled. Her husband's reaction was brutal in its cruelty. Instead of offering comfort, he regarded her diagnosis as poetic justice. To him, her illness was not a tragedy, but a fitting punishment for her betrayal. The man who once provided her with everything now looked at her with disgust, as though she were no longer worthy of even pity. He avoided her, and when family gatherings forced them into the same room, he carried himself with a detached coldness that made her feel like she no longer existed. Her cousin, upon discovering the truth, was devastated. The man she had trusted with her marriage had not only betrayed her, but had endangered her life. The divorce papers came quickly, and Karim was left exposed, his once comfortable life torn apart. The scandal was no longer just about infidelity. It had become a story of reckless deceit, betrayal, and irreversible damage. The families who once dined together at long tables filled with food now barely spoke. The whispers among Dubai's wealthy elite grew louder, each version of the story more twisted than the last. Nadia's world collapsed into isolation. Friends drifted away, unwilling to be associated with her scandal. Invitations stopped coming. The woman who once commanded attention wherever she went was now whispered about in hushed tones, her name reduced to scandalous gossip. She was not just a woman who had cheated. She was a cautionary tale of what happens when forbidden desires collide with dangerous secrets. Her rage toward Karim consumed her thoughts. She blamed him for everything, the loss of her health, the destruction of her reputation, the emptiness that surrounded her every day. The love she once claimed to feel had turned into venom. She could not forgive him for ruining her life, and the bitterness twisted into something darker. While her husband had chosen silent punishment and her cousin had chosen divorce, Nadia began plotting her own form of revenge. In her mind, Karim deserved to suffer as she did. He had walked away, leaving her to carry the consequences alone, but she would not let him escape unpunished. The disease that had destroyed her life became the weapon she believed could destroy his. The betrayal had come full circle, but Nadia was determined to make sure the ending was one of her own design. Her obsession with revenge grew each day, feeding on her anger and despair. What had begun as a forbidden romance had now become a deadly game. The affair had taken everything from her, but it had also given her one final purpose: to ensure Karim would never escape the same fate he had inflicted upon her. The scandal that had once threatened to ruin reputations was now on the verge of becoming something far darker, something that would leave scars impossible to hide. The nightmare began quietly, almost unnoticed, when Nadia's health started to deteriorate. At first, she convinced herself that stress was to blame. The endless whispers in her social circles, the humiliation in her husband's cold indifference, and the sleepless nights replaying every mistake she had made seemed enough to explain her constant fatigue. But her body refused to recover. She would wake drenched in sweat, her appetite faded, and her once radiant beauty slipped away as though it were being stripped from her piece by piece. The visits to the clinic ended the illusion. The results were delivered in a voice that seemed distant, almost unreal. She had tested positive for HIV. The words clung to her like chains. For a long time she sat frozen, unable to process what it meant. She thought of the endless dinner parties where she had shone like a jewel, of the luxury boutiques where salespeople scrambled to serve her, of the hushed envy she inspired among her peers. All of it collapsed in that single moment. Wealth could not protect her, nor could reputation. She was reduced to a diagnosis that carried with it fear, shame, and judgment. Returning to her mansion, she found no comfort. Her husband had already discovered the truth, perhaps even before she did, and his reaction was merciless. He looked at her not with sympathy, but with satisfaction, as though the universe itself had delivered justice on his behalf. He refused to speak about it, refused to acknowledge her suffering, and in that silence he condemned her to live like a prisoner inside the home she once ruled. Every glance he avoided, every step he took away from her deepened her humiliation. She was no longer a wife in his eyes, only a symbol of disgrace. The gossip spread faster than she could contain it. Dubai's social elite had always thrived on stories of scandal, and this one was too rich to ignore. It was whispered in salons, murmured in cafes, and passed along in hushed voices at gatherings. The tale of the millionaire S-wife who betrayed her husband with her cousin S-husband was already sensational, but the revelation of her illness turned it into a story too dark to silence. People speculated cruelly, twisting the facts, adding their own poison to the narrative. She became a pariah, her name spoken with pity and scorn, her fall from grace discussed as though it were entertainment. Her cousin, when she learned the truth, was devastated in ways words could barely describe. Karim had betrayed her not only by breaking their marriage vows, but by endangering her life with his secret. The divorce was swift and final, and she made sure the separation was public. Karim was left exposed, stripped of the image he had carefully maintained. His name carried disgrace, his marriage was destroyed, and his reputation crumbled in the same circles that once embraced him. For Nadia, however, the suffering was deeper. She carried the disease in her body, a constant reminder of her mistake and his betrayal. Her once vibrant health was slipping away, and every glance in the mirror reminded her of what she had lost. The glittering gowns that once fit her figure now hung loose on her weakened body. The jewels sparkled against dull skin, their brilliance mocking the emptiness in her eyes. She had lived in abundance, yet now she was surrounded by a silence that felt suffocating. Her isolation grew unbearable. Friends who had once clung to her side during shopping trips and parties now distanced themselves, afraid of association with her scandal. Invitations ceased, calls went unanswered, and the women who had once envied her life now whispered that her downfall was inevitable. The mansion, once a symbol of success, felt like a cage. She wandered its halls aimlessly, haunted by memories of what it had once meant to be adored. Bitterness began to consume her. Every night she replayed the chain of events that led her here, and always it circled back to Karim. He had hidden the truth from her, drawn her into his world, and abandoned her when everything collapsed. He had not only betrayed her trust, but sentenced her to a lifetime of suffering. The anger grew until it was no longer a fleeting emotion but a constant fire inside her chest. Karim, on the other hand, was unraveling in his own way. His wife had left him, his extended family despised him, and the wealthy elite who once welcomed him into their homes now avoided him as though he carried a curse. He tried to continue as though nothing had changed, but his world was crumbling. He was exposed as both a betrayer and a coward, and while Nadia faced humiliation, he faced destruction of another kind. His secrets were inching closer to the surface, and the disease he had hidden for years was no longer something he could outrun. The two of them, once bound by passion, now stood on opposite sides of a chasm filled with rage and ruin. Nadia began to plot, her mind consumed not with recovery but with revenge. She believed that Karim should suffer as she had suffered. Every sleepless night, every moment of shame, every stare from strangers that reminded her of who she had become, all of it demanded justice in her eyes. She no longer saw herself as a victim of circumstance but as an executioner preparing her judgment. Her thoughts turned darker as her body weakened. The diagnosis had taken her health, but it had also stripped away her fear. She felt she had nothing left to lose, and in that realization she found a dangerous strength. If her life was already destroyed, then she would ensure Karim's life would burn with hers. Her rage crystallized into a plan, one that would use the very weapon he had given her to strike back. Her husband continued his silent punishment. Her cousin had sought justice through separation, but Nadia's choice was different. She was not interested in walking away quietly. The whispers in the city had branded her a fallen woman, but she would not allow herself to be remembered as a passive victim. Instead, she began to see herself as someone who would write the ending of her story with her own hands. The disease that consumed her body also fueled her mind with thoughts of vengeance. Karim had thought he could escape, that he could walk away and continue his life after destroying hers. Nadia promised herself that he would not. Every moment she spent in silence, she was sharpening her resolve, waiting for the right time to strike. What began as a forbidden romance had turned into a scandal, and now it was transforming into something far darker. Nadia no longer dreamed of love or forgiveness or even redemption. She dreamed of revenge, pure and merciless. She would wait, she would plan, and when the moment came, she would make sure Karim paid the same price she had been forced to pay. The story that had once been whispered as scandal among Dubai's wealthy elite was about to take a turn no one expected. The woman who had lost everything was about to reclaim power in the most twisted way imaginable, and when she did, the destruction would leave scars too deep for anyone to hide. Nadia's resolve hardened with every passing day. The weakness in her body only sharpened the fury in her mind. She had once believed she was powerless, a woman trapped in a mansion of silence and shame, but now she began to see her illness as a weapon. If Karim had dragged her into this darkness, then she would drag him down with her. It was no longer about love, betrayal, or even despair. It was about vengeance, and vengeance gave her strength she thought she had lost. Her plotting began quietly. She started tracking Karim's movements, gathering information about his routines. She learned which cafes he still dared to visit, which gyms he frequented, and where he met his friends. Despite the scandal, Karim had not completely retreated from public life. He was still arrogant enough to think he could rebuild, to pretend that the whispers around him would eventually fade. He walked the streets with false confidence, but Nadia knew that beneath his surface he feared exposure of the truth he had hidden so long. She would use that fear to destroy him. The first step was to make contact again. Karim had been avoiding her, ignoring her calls and messages, but Nadia was persistent. She began sending notes through mutual acquaintances, carefully worded to suggest that she wanted reconciliation. She hinted at forgiveness, at the possibility of them finding a way back to what they once had. Karim hesitated, but his ego betrayed him. He wanted to believe she still needed him, that despite the chaos, she could not live without him. Eventually, curiosity and arrogance pulled him back toward her. She lured him with promises of secrecy, assuring him that no one would ever know. A private villa was rented under a false name, hidden away from prying eyes. She made the place perfect for their meeting, candles lit, soft music playing, a scene designed to disarm him. When he walked through the door, he found her dressed in the elegance he once craved, her frailty masked beneath expensive fabrics and makeup. For a moment, it was as if time had turned back, and he believed he was stepping into one of their forbidden rendezvous. But Nadia's intentions were far darker. The night was carefully calculated. She played her part, drawing him in with familiarity and warmth, all the while ensuring that the revenge she had planned would unfold exactly as she intended. Karim did not realize until too late that he had been trapped, not by affection but by the same weapon he had once carried in secret. Nadia revealed nothing with words. She didn't need to. Her actions were enough to guarantee that the curse he had given her would now belong to him inescapably. When the truth hit him, it was like a storm. Karim's arrogance collapsed into terror as he understood what had happened. He had thought himself clever enough to keep his condition hidden, safe behind denial and deceit, but Nadia had turned his silence into his punishment. In that villa, she had ensured that he could never escape the fate he had inflicted on her. The man who had once believed himself untouchable was now bound to the same future he had condemned her to. Nadia watched him with cold detachment. The passion that had once consumed her was gone, replaced by satisfaction at his horror. For the first time in months, she felt powerful again. He begged her with his eyes, searching for sympathy, but she offered none. Her silence was as cruel as her husband's had been, but hers carried intention. She wanted him to feel the weight of the betrayal, the realization that his own secret had become his undoing. The scandal that had shaken their families now deepened into something darker. Karim, already disgraced by divorce and whispers of infidelity, now carried a truth that would eventually surface. He could not confess it without exposing himself, but he could not escape it either. The disease would consume him just as it had consumed Nadia, and she knew that every day he lived would be a reminder of the trap he had walked into. In the weeks that followed, Nadia's body weakened further, but her mind remained sharp. She no longer cared for the judgment of society. Friends who had abandoned her remained gone, and her husband continued his cold silence, but none of it mattered. She had rewritten her story in the only way she could. Instead of being remembered as a victim of betrayal, she had ensured that she would be remembered as the woman who fought back, who refused to let her betrayer walk away unscathed. Karim's life spiraled downward. His attempts to rebuild his reputation collapsed under the weight of his growing paranoia. Every whisper, every glance he caught from strangers felt like suspicion. He began withdrawing from public spaces, fearful that his secret would emerge. His health began to falter, and with it the facade of confidence he had tried to maintain. The disease he had ignored for years now revealed itself mercilessly, and he faced the same reality Nadia had endured. He had thought he could live untouched by consequences, but now the punishment was inescapable. For the wealthy families who once dined together in opulence, the scandal became a permanent stain. The story was whispered in corners, repeated with fascination and fear. A millionaire's wife, a forbidden affair, a cousin's husband hiding a deadly truth, and revenge so twisted it destroyed both lives. It was a tale that none dared to tell openly, yet none could forget. In the world of Dubai's elite, it became a cautionary legend. Proof that behind the glittering towers and luxury cars lay shadows too dark to ignore. Nadia's final days were marked by silence. She spent her time alone, not seeking forgiveness or sympathy. Her husband remained distant, her cousin moved on with her life, and the circle of friends that once adored her was gone forever. But inside, Nadia carried a grim satisfaction. She had not allowed Karim to destroy her without consequence. She had turned her suffering into his punishment, and in that act, she reclaimed a measure of control that the world had tried to strip away. When she finally succumbed to her illness, the whispers returned. Some said her death was tragic, others said it was deserved. But all agreed on one thing: the story of Nadia and Karim was unlike any other. It was not just a scandal of infidelity, but a tale of secrets, betrayal, and revenge so cruel it blurred the line between victim and perpetrator. Karim, still alive but weakened, carried the curse she had given him. His name became synonymous with disgrace, and the life he once envisioned for himself dissolved into fear and shame. Nadia's vengeance lived on through him, haunting him in every shadow, every sleepless night, every reminder of what he had done. The story closed not with redemption or forgiveness, but with ruin on both sides. A millionaire's wife who lost everything in her search for love, a cousin's husband who concealed a deadly truth, and a revenge that ensured neither would escape unscathed. In the end, love had turned to poison, and passion had become the sharpest weapon of all.